Welcome to Proles of the Round Table.
Hello and welcome to Proles of the Round Table, where we sit down, have a few drinks, and talk leftist history. Please do us a favor and subscribe on your favorite podcast app and rate/review the show to help extend our reach. If you want to support us even more, check out our Patreon, where you can give your hard-earned wages to a bunch of hyperactive alcoholics. We have a ton of benefits for donations at any level, and all that cash goes straight back into the podcast. Find out more at patreon.com/prolespod. We wanted to thank this episode's primary sponsor, without whom we wouldn't have these nice microphones, so big thanks to our sponsor, General Electric.
Appreciate it.
All right, so today we have with us pretty much the whole crew. Damn. I guess we'll start with you, Ezra. What are you drinking?
Your homie's back, y'all. I got some LaCroix coconut.
Nice. Jezza Steele, Jeremy, what you got?
I'm back on brand again. Tsingtao. I did actually. So I've got the Kami beer, and then I've also brought the Bootstrap. So
You gotta stop buying that shit.
Yeah, it's a little Kami, little reactionary. Mixing it up.
Little Kami, big
true
reactionary.
centrism. Both sides.
Alright, so my hop, I am drinking a beer I just found at the liquor store like 20 minutes ago. It's a bourbon barrel ale called Oakspire by New Belgium, and it's 9%. Here we go.
Yikes.
Get ready, kids.
Shit.
8 hops about to just get toasted and make shitty jokes all night.
Hey!
What else is it? Would it be?
Justin, what do you got?
Yep, I'm Justin, and I'll be drinking New Belgium's Accumulation White IPA, which is actually really good, but pretty mild.
Nice. Ethan, Udopologist, what do you got for us?
I'm drinking a Hite, which is some sort of Korean beer. It tastes like Korean Bud Light. It says it's extra cold though, so that's
Extra
cool.
cold. Shit.
Doesn't it say extra flavor as well?
Extra cold, ice point filtration system, bottom fermentation, extra drinkability.
Oh, extra drinkability. I'm all about that drinkability. And I'm going to be the host for this episode because the Proles are asking for it. They like that.
Stop it.
That beautiful baritone.
The
like
Proles have been pulled.
Bass. No treble.
Please stop.
Wow.
I'm your
Coincidentally, this will be the last time this is the podcast.
the plan's working. Good. No, and I'm your host, Taylor, otherwise known as Tanky McTankface, and I'm drinking Brooklyn Lager.
Yummy.
So it's a good one. So tonight's episode, we've got Ethan. He's going to talk to us about nukes, about nuclear power, about nuclear weapons, about the history of that.
Aliens?
All of that.
No aliens.
Sad.
Unfortunately. This is all human-grown misery. So can't blame anybody else for this one. Obviously this is a huge topic, and I'm not going to be able to cover everything, but we've got pretty much from 1914 all the way until 15.7 million years in the future when some of our toxic waste stops being radioactive. So, right around the turn of the 20th century, physicists made some big discoveries about like the nature of the atom. Atoms,
Did they make any discoveries on the nature of the Eve?
God damn it. Too early for that shit.
Hashtag deep.
Sorry.
So, if you haven't heard of them, atoms are the building blocks of. I don't know. No, they're particles. I don't know. I'm not a physicist. I teach theater at a high school.
I like how you said you were going to be able to explain.
Well, I will. Just
all
wait.
that stuff.
We're gonna get there. Okay. So
Rocket science.
I did so much. I spent so long trying to figure out nuclear physics here. So we'll see how that goes. In 1914, H.G. Wells, who's an author, he writes a book called The World Set Free, and he comes up with the idea of a bomb that uses radioactivity. And in that book, like, the world gets destroyed from these radioactive bombs, but they are able to rebuild with one world government, and it actually ends up being a good thing. But so H.G. Wells was the first one to come up with the idea of a bomb that uses radiation, like a nuclear bomb. So then in the early 30s, you've got this guy named Leo Szilard. He comes up with the idea of a nuclear chain reaction, but he can't make it happen in his lab. I'll explain that in a second. Cool. But then in 1938, these two German scientists named Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, they just...
Hahn and Strassmann. You're pronouncing a lot better the European names.
Otto and Fritz.
Otto and Fritz.
You're grounded from hosting every.
So they make nuclear fission happen. Like they make it happen. And again, I'll explain fission in a second here. I'm trying to build up the anticipation. You're like, what is this nuclear fission thing?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
You paid for the whole seat, but you only need the edge. Okay. All right. So in 1939, Leo Szilard, he's afraid that the Nazis are going to develop a nuclear bomb, and so he gets his friend, this little guy named Albert Einstein, and that friend's name was Albert Einstein.
Just little Albert Einstein. Just a little guy.
And they write to President Roosevelt, hoping to convince the U.S. to fund research into fission. So then, by the 1940s, scientists were aware of the possibility of harnessing fission for a weapon or a tool of some sort. So a conventional explosive, like a normal bomb, it detonates through a chemical reaction. Here's where the science, like the chemistry, comes in. Bear with me here. So it detonates through a chemical reaction. It's like burning a log, except instantaneously. So substances like TNT, they convert really quickly into gases, which take up more space, and that's how you get an explosion, basically.
It's like a white guy.
What? They take up more space.
Full of gas and they take up space.
All right, I see where you're going.
Or an American, I guess.
So a TNT explosion, it is something like 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit in the explosion. These hot gases expand to create a blast wave of compressed air of like high pressure, and that wave knocks down buildings, breaks bones. That's how bombs and explosives work. So then nuclear weapons use sort of the same principle, but they raise the temperature to millions of degrees Fahrenheit instead of 9,000, and they have a blast wave that's obviously incredibly more powerful. So nuclear fission refers to splitting atoms. So inside an atom, you've got the nucleus, right? And that has protons and neutrons. And so when you... Sorry. So the energy that binds together these protons and neutrons inside the nucleus of an atom is really powerful, and so when you split an atom, some of that energy is released. So depending on the element, the neutrons that are released when you split the atom, they can hit the nucleus of another atom, which makes that one split and releases more neutrons, which does that again and again, and that's how you get a chain reaction. So if this happens like all at once, like almost instantaneously, that's how you get a nuclear explosion. If an element is able to do this, it's possible to start a chain reaction with it, it's called fissile, which is because it's fission.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you, Mr. Ethan.
I'm just trying to, because there's a lot of complicated words here, and I don't understand it, so I'm trying to talk slowly so that I can figure it out. So the only naturally fissile element is uranium-235, which is found in very small quantities in uranium ore, which is a thing that we've had for thousands of years. People have dug it up, but they've used it for dyes because it's yellow. So they would mash it up and make yellow dye out of it.
I'm sure that was healthy.
Well, yeah. In 1896, this French physicist, he discovered radioactivity by putting uranium, like a chunk of uranium, on a photographic plate. And then he saw that he's like, oh shit, there's something coming out of this hunk of metal. And so the other big element that you use for nuclear shit is plutonium, which they accidentally invented while they were trying to enrich uranium. So FDR reads the letter and he talks with his fellas, and they decide to create the Manhattan Project, which was basically coordinating nuclear research for the government, and it was for the purpose of building a nuclear bomb. And so it was led by this guy named Leslie Groves, who was he was actually the military dude who was responsible for building the Pentagon. So he had a lot of experience with organizing a lot of things. I don't know. I'm assuming that's why.
Organizing, yes.
And so they had sites all over the country, but the three big ones were Los Alamos, which is in New Mexico. That was like their main research lab. They had the Hanford site, which was in Washington, which is where they had the first plutonium production reactor. You make plutonium by doing science stuff to uranium. And so they had a reactor specifically to make plutonium in Hanford, Washington.
Why was it called the Manhattan Project? Why did they choose that name?
They called it the Manhattan Project because originally it was they had an office in Manhattan, and it was like the Manhattan division of some army thing, and the name just stuck even when they were not in New York anymore. But so we'll talk about the Hanford site a little later if people can remind me to talk about it. But not a great story with that. But and then the other place was Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which was a uranium production site. They were making enriched uranium, which is basically you process regular uranium to create stuff with more uranium-235, which is the good shit you want.
The good.
And so you had, actually, it's interesting. They had the K25 gaseous diffusion plant. It was the biggest roofed building in the world. It was a mile long at that point.
Fuck.
Yeah, Oak Ridge. What? No, it was above ground. It had a roof though. So Leslie Groves was the army guy in charge of the Manhattan Project, but the brains behind the operation was this guy named J. Robert Oppenheimer. And so Oppenheimer was a physicist who was teaching at Berkeley. Super smart guy. He was an excellent physicist. When they explained nuclear fission to him, he was basically able to figure out the science behind coming up with a bomb in 10 minutes.
Basically what everybody that's listening to this podcast did after you explained it.
Yeah, exactly. The last 10, 15 minutes have just been galaxy brain. And so the thing about one of the interesting things about J. Robert Oppenheimer, though, is that he was a communist. He was a member of the Communist Party of the USA back when that was cool, instead of meaning you were a cop. But yeah, he was brought into the Communist Party by his brother Frank, and then his mistress, named Jean Tatlock. So I mean, Oppenheimer's a fascinating guy, and we could talk about him. We could do a whole episode on that.
Didn't his mistress kill herself?
She did,
Yeah.
and So his
I
wife.
learned about that in a play that Ethan directed.
It's if you ever get the chance to see, if someone's doing Irreversible by Jack Cart, you should go see it. But he did. Yeah, he was keeping up his affair with Jean while he was working on the Manhattan Project, living in Los Alamos, and that came back to bite him in the ass later. But yeah, she ended up killing herself, and her brother was not convinced that his brother wasn't convinced that she actually killed herself. He thought that the FBI killed her because she was distracting Oppenheimer from the Manhattan Project, and I don't know. I mean, it's not like the FBI has ever. The FBI doesn't do that, though.
Yikes.
It's never happened. The FBI doesn't kill people.
So
Cough, wormwood cough.
yikes. On Los Alamos, they basically they came up with two models for a nuclear bomb. There was the gun method, quote unquote, which was basically two pieces of plutonium placed at either end of a gun, two pieces of uranium, I think, would be placed at either end of a gun barrel. One would be shot at the other, which would create supercritical mass when they collided, which means it would go like when it goes critical, that means that the chain reaction's happening. So the atoms in that fission in 10 billionths of a second, so the timing is obviously very difficult. So they were having some trouble with this, like getting it was blowing up before they could get it to go supercritical, so it would just like bust open the gun and not do a nuclear bomb thing. So, plus, I think it was plutonium. Plutonium sends out stray neutrons, which sometimes detonated the whole thing early, which would, again, ruin the launch device. So they came up with this other way of doing it called the implosion method, which their nickname for it was the introvert, which is funny. It was a sphere of plutonium surrounded by conventional explosives, which would detonate simultaneously, creating a shockwave that would squish the sphere down, increasing its density and creating a supercritical, supercriticality. So unfortunately, they had a lot of trouble getting a perfectly symmetrical blast wave because, like it's a sphere, so it needs to be on all the different sides. And if it wasn't perfectly symmetrical, the plutonium would blow up without going critical. So again, not super useful when you're trying to make a huge nuclear bomb. So the bombs they ended up dropping on Japan, which we'll talk about in a minute, they used both. Fat Man and Little Boy. Fat Man was the plutonium, was the implosion method because it was a big sphere, and then Little Boy was longer and thinner, and that was the gun method. So uranium is kind of hard to come by. I mean, or at least it was. I don't know how you get a hold of uranium now. I don't really need any. So
Libyan terrorists, I think.
So during the Manhattan Project, the U.S. had access to these the biggest, most well-developed uranium mines were in the Belgian Congo. It was like the richest uranium ore in the world. And so they actually sent OSS agents down there to secure the ore and make sure none of it got smuggled to Nazi Germany. And I'm sure that was interesting. But yeah, so they had the good shit from the Congo.
Luckily, it got to the good guys, the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So then, starting in 1944, they started getting as much uranium out of North America as they could because they didn't want to be reliant. They didn't want to be relying on foreign energy. That was the explanation. It was we don't want to be relying on foreign uranium. So what they did was, so most of the uranium in the United States is in the Southwest, in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. And it just so happens that most of it happens...
Pod nuke win.
That's a stretch goal. Post-pod nation state. So
we want to be able to afford new mics, a new computer, and to be able to build a bomb.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, JK.
So it just so happens that most of this uranium was on Navajo reservations. So they leased 1,000 mines on Navajo reservation land and got Navajo people to dig it out. So at the time, it was one of the only jobs that Navajo people were able to find. They were paid at most minimum wage, at most, a lot of time, because what were you going to do?
Right.
Who are you going to complain to? And so, at this point, one of the predominant modes of transportation for the Navajo people were, horse and wagon. The Navajo language didn't have a word for radiation. Not a ton of Navajo people spoke English. And, so they didn't know what radiation was. And the government sure didn't fucking tell them. And so, so pretty much all of the Navajo miners, report they weren't educated about the hazards of uranium mining. And so... Yeah, between 1944 and 1989, almost 4 million tons of uranium was pulled out of these mines, and it wasn't until 1990 that the government passed the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which, it's a struggle that they're still fighting. Most of these people are, dead from old age now, but, yeah, obviously, so the government fucked over the Navajo people.
Again.
Well, and that's the thing that really gets me, is that, these Navajo people who have been killed and just genocided, had genocide done against them for centuries by the U.S., offered up their services and their language to help fight Hitler because they heard about what was happening over in Europe, and the Navajo had the highest rate of like conscription, like voluntary conscription during World War II, and like so they all this, and they still volunteer this, and this is immediately how they're repaid, and it's just it's fucking it's ridiculous. So sorry, this episode probably won't have as many jokes. It's because it's like the entire thing. It's just 70 years of terrible shit.
Abolish U.S. win.
ASAP. Inshallah. So most of the scientists on the Manhattan Project, they thought they needed to build it so that the Nazis weren't going to build it and use it first.
So, I mean, and in your play, you kind of talked about this, or like, I guess that play, what's the guy's name?
Jack Karp.
Jack Karp. What I gathered, and what I think you probably talked about afterwards, was that they brought on scientists who were dedicated to this idea of, one, being the Nazis to this weapon, and two, that were just scientists. They wanted to be doing work in their field they felt was important, and so they were kind of used in a sense that was not totally like above ground from the U.S. government in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with the thing with a lot of these scientists is that they were thinking. I mean, this is where nuclear, like, this was the cutting edge of physics. Like, if you were a physicist, this is what was happening. Like, this is where all the advancements were being made. This is where all of the interesting stuff was happening. And so they were definitely there was kind of this thought that, well, if we're not going to figure it out, then who is? You know, like, if someone else is going to get to it first, if we don't get to it. So but then a lot of them, they want to make sure the Nazis didn't do it first, because a lot of these scientists were Jewish. A lot of them were Jews brought over from Europe, and they had to flee the Nazis, and so they had seen firsthand what the Nazis were doing, and so they were like, if building this terrible thing, like, is going to prevent them from building that and using it, then, like, we got to do it. And so, but the thing is that Germany was years, even by the end of World War II, Germany was years away from a successful atomic bomb. The U.S. knew this, and they kept it from the scientists because they didn't want the scientists to stop working. They needed them to still think that right up until Germany surrendered, they needed the scientists to think that, like, oh shit, like, we got to do this. Exactly.
Didn't Oppenheimer didn't Oppenheimer talk to a German scientist that knew that they weren't that close, but that German scientist?
Niels Bohr.
Yeah, it was Bohr.
So there were a couple. Niels Bohr was one scientist who he fled. He was friends with Werner Heisenberg, who was like the biggest. He was the Oppenheimer of Nazi Germany, and Niels Bohr fled and helped out with the project. There were a bunch of other European scientists. I'm trying to think of. Enrico Fermi was one. Isidore Rabi was another one. There were, like, Oppenheimer probably knew before most of the other scientists did, but he kept it secret because he's like, I can't have my people slowing down. Like, we have to build this bomb. And so the whole thing with so during the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos, there were a couple of deaths researching radiation. So there was this one guy named Harry Daghlian. In August 1945, he accidentally dropped a brick of tungsten carbide onto a plutonium pile, which apparently caused some sort of reaction. He got a huge dose of radiation. He died 25 days later he was in a coma for the last 2. He was 24 years old. He died incredibly painfully. The next guy was Louis Slotin. This was in 1946. May, he was doing a demonstration on the same plutonium core that killed this other guy. He accidentally, he dropped a screwdriver and accidentally created a critical.
What the hell?
Well, it's fun. They actually called it the Demon Core because it killed 2 people. And so what happened to him was described in the official literature as total disintegration of bodily functions. He died 9 days later. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second when we get to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yay! So
just some light subject matter for
exactly.
your listening.
Yeah. So so there was a fundamental disagreement between a lot of the Manhattan Project scientists and the government. Like, a lot of the scientists operated under the assumption that science is built on sharing knowledge. Like, they wanted to share knowledge with the Soviets, who they were allied, like the U.S. was allied with during World War II, believe it or not. And
And many of the scientists were part of the Communist Party at the time, right?
I mean, there was a we'll talk about communist spies in a minute here, but yeah, there were a decent number who had, if not members of the Communist Party, they were sympathetic. But there was a lot of them had this idea of like that science isn't built like you can't have science when one person only knows one part, another person only knows another part. You have to, like, everyone has to know everything. We share knowledge. That's how science works. The government disagreed, I guess.
Shocking.
Shocking. And so
That is not, however, how politics works.
yikes. So then in July, you've got this test. They test the first nuclear device at a location that was named Trinity. So this guy Enrico Fermi, he'd said there was a 10% chance that the bomb would ignite the atmosphere. No one knew what was going to happen.
Right.
Like,
They were just
there was a
guessing.
non-zero chance that like the atmosphere of the planet could burst into flames.
And they still did it.
Yeah,
did
absolutely.
anyway.
It was only a 10% chance.
Well done.
1 in 10. Good work. They were taking bets over how big it would be. Like, some people would be like, oh, no, we're going to all die, so I won't cash in, but that's my bet. And then some people are like, oh, it's not going to work. Or, like, yeah. And so, yeah, so it was this giant metal sphere that they hauled to the top of this tower. And actually, they had a bunch of surplus army mattresses underneath in case it fell. Like, just super...
Janky.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but so they, like at 5 o'clock in the morning, they detonated this bomb, and and it worked. Everyone described, like, no one had seen anything like it before. There actually was there was a woman in I want to say Albuquerque or somewhere in a near one of the major nearby cities who was blind, who saw the light and thought that like the sun was rising early or something.
What?
It was that bright. Like we can't. Yeah, we can't imagine how bright this is. Like they described it as 1,000 suns. Like it's incredibly bright. No shadows. No, just for a few brief seconds. Yeah, it's an.
If you look,
There's plenty of videos of this. Yeah.
if you look directly at the blast while it's happening, without some sort of eye protection, then you will go blind.
Oh.
Jeremy and I are old enough to remember doing drills in school for
For nuclear
drills.
Yeah. Wild times. Duck and cover.
The good old days.
Don't look at the windows. If you see a bright light, don't look at it.
Yeah.
That was like what they told us. And hide under the desk.
Get under your
and don't
desk,
look at the
cover your
windows.
head. Yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting. Like we're still in danger of
I'm convinced it was only a way to drum up hatred
Yes,
towards the
in the
Soviet
Soviet
Union.
Oh yeah. Well, we'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. But
And it wasn't practical. You were going to save yourself by ducking
No,
and covering.
yeah.
Like if the bomb was
No.
going to hit the school, you're going to die. It's not going to.
yeah, basically, yeah. No, but people needed to feel like
Yes.
they were doing something. You know.
But I think also to be afraid.
Well,
be
yeah,
afraid.
absolutely. No, absolutely. You need to drum up the fear of like, our enemies are
Yeah.
over there and they could annihilate us at
At
any
any
time,
time, yeah.
and so we need to be ready. Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% what was happening. So, so the test worked. So there's that famous quote of Oppenheimer was like, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He didn't say that at the time. I mean, he did say it, but later on when he was reflecting, he's like, "That's what I thought at the time."
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
The only thing that people said that he said when it happened was, "It worked." And then
shit.
yeah, basically. And then one of the other scientists has a quote that I think was much more fitting. Is he said, I think to Oppenheimer, "Well, now we're all sons of bitches." So
Amen. I'm sorry. Also, if you're like a fucking commie or sympathetic to communist like ideology or struggles across the world, and like I get it, you're a scientist, and like a lot of scientists at that level operate on brainwaves of just like getting shit done and learning and like being the best they can. But like, I think that's a great quote, because you don't get to fucking pick and choose like, oh, you could be a really cool scientist and a communist at the same time while putting like the fucking most destructive weapon ever in the hands of a piece of shit capitalist imperialist nation.
well, and that's the thing, is this idea of like, oh well, science is apolitical. Like science is, as scientists, like it's not up to us what they do with our science, and like that's not the way it's ever been. Like literally ever.
Well, that's also like that's the most fucking American like liberal bullshit ever. This isn't political. This isn't political. Every fucking thing is political. Like, get over it. Understand that your actions have consequences.
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
I mean, that's
But that's it.
I mean, that's true.
that's
Like
the
obviously,
concept,
it's like Immortalized by Jeff Goldblum, but like that's a real thing. Is this idea of just the illusion of being able to do something uninfluenced by politics outside of the capitalist world, if that's where you're living. Yeah, that's just not how it works. Especially because the United States government was funding all of this, spending billions and billions of dollars. And you're gonna say, whoa, it's just we're just doing this. It's apolitical. Like, I know the government's funding us, and like we
Science
have
for the
ID
sake of
badges,
science,
and exactly. I understand why that's appealing, but it's just not
true.
true.
Yeah.
It's just not true. So, and that leads us right into August. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are two cities in Japan. So World War II. I'm trying to. Was it April when Germany surrendered, or was it May?
No, it was like
VE days.
Yeah,
it was
the June.
June, I think.
Okay. So yeah, so the Nazis surrender in June, but then everything shifts over to the Eastern Front.
No, it's May.
It's May. Okay.
Wednesday, May 8th.
Okay.
Pacific, dude. Eastern Front was the Soviets and the
No, you're right. Sorry, I meant the Pacific Theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they. I'll just get right into it. So here's the thing. So they dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima. They dropped a bomb on Hiroshima. And they dropped a bomb on Nagasaki. And so when I was growing up, when I learned about this in school, they said that, and this isn't just in school. This is the narrative is that they dropped the bombs and that made Japan surrender. Right? Did anybody else hear that?
Yep.
Oh, all growing up.
100%.
Yes, absolutely.
I still hear that now.
Yes, exactly. You still hear that now. It's not true. It's not true. So, so here's the thing. So the story is that Japan wasn't gonna surrender. Like they were just gonna fight till the bitter end. There was no thought of surrender, no thought of any of that.
Yeah.
We have President Harry Truman, his private journal on July 12th. So he wrote in his journal that he'd read a telegram that had been sent from the Japanese emperor asking for peace, and they just wanted the USSR to mediate. Yeah, so basically everybody at the top levels of the US government and military knew that Japan was trying to end the war. They just wanted to keep their emperor. That was like their one condition. So at the time, pretty much everybody in power thought that when the USSR declared war on Japan, that would bring about their surrender, which they knew that the Soviet Union was planning to do before the emperor even tried to get peace. So they were like, when the Soviet Union gets in, they're not going to want to keep going. Well, and so in May, the Japanese minister to Switzerland had asked the OSS for a way to end hostilities. And so here's the thing. So one of the things that I was always told, or like part of the narrative, is like, oh well, they had to drop the bombs because the only alternative was to invade Japan, and like the casualties would have been in
So
That
much
was- that was a
millions,
huge one that was always
millions.
told.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
The cost in lives. Yeah.
So at the time, the biggest military estimate, like the furthest outside figure at the time when they were putting together all the plans, like the most like, oh, this is gonna be terrible, was 46,000 troops dying, which is like, that's a lot of people, but most of them put it around 20,000, 26,000, which is different than the things I was told, which is like, oh, 1 million U.S. troops, like 1 million soldiers, or like it's the same kind of thing as like Stalin killed like 200 billion
Well, and
people.
like this goes back to Orientalism and like the swarthy hordes, where it's just like, oh, they're a warrior culture and they're always gonna fight to the death. And like, it's fucking racist bullshit through and through.
they don't know how to give up. They're just
Right, you know,
They're like machines.
It's the same thing that the U.S. has done for fucking centuries to vilify any group that it can by othering them. And I think we talked about this on the Ho Chi Minh episode too, but Parenti has a great talk about the swarthy hordes and like how U.S. cinema portrays this, and like obviously propaganda is huge, and there were war movies during the war and right after the war that led into things like the Korean War and the Vietnam War, and all this is built around Orientalist, racist bullshit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so even at the time they were like, oh well, we'll be able to conquer. Like, here's the thing: pretty much every city in Japan had already been firebombed to shit.
Right.
Like the entire country was almost leveled, and so the only thing that was still going was there were some generals of the Japanese who were like, no, we're gonna fucking fight this. And but like the emperor wanted peace, like most of the government of Japan wanted peace, like the people obviously wanted peace. And then another thing that was said is like, oh well, we warned them, right? Like, did you ever hear this one? I heard this one that we dropped leaflets.
The pamphlets. Yep.
They dropped those after they were bombed. Can you imagine? Like they bombed this city, so there's people like the survivors trying to put everything together, and then another plane comes by and drops these little like pamphlets warning about your like, how perverse. Yeah, that's disgusting. That didn't happen until afterwards. Yeah, so it was not to end the war. It was not to make Japan surrender. So what was it for?
It's testing.
No, they already knew it worked.
Yeah, testing on people. They wanted to see how it would affect the population.
I mean, I think that was part of it, but there was a bigger
they
one.
sent scientists and doctors in immediately.
There was two
a bigger
reasons.
one.
It was to test it on actual human populations and to
Scare the Soviets.
Yeah,
Ding,
to
ding,
scare the
ding,
Soviets.
ding,
Yeah, that's
ding.
the other
Yep, exactly. That's exactly it. And so,
My man Joey Steele never gets scared.
no, there are a bunch.
He ain't scared of nothing.
So
Maybe spiders though. Spiders can be scary.
Agreed.
the Secretary of State, Henry Stimson, there are a bunch of examples of him writing about like, oh, we can use this bomb as a diplomatic trump card against the Soviet Union, and so Truman actively avoided meeting Stalin until after the Trinity test. He wanted to make sure that he knew the bomb worked, so that he would be able to be like, hey buddy, I got that.
That's some low energy bullshit.
So, and then the other thing that you hear, that I hear, and I think a lot of people hear in the U.S. anyway, is that like, well, the Japanese Empire committed all of these atrocities, like it was justified. Here's the thing: I'm not going to defend Japanese imperialism. They did horrific things.
Would though.
No, I'm not going to defend Japanese imperialism, but that's a completely separate issue.
Right.
The military of this nation committing like horrific crimes does not justify bombing civilians, like murdering civilians and children. No, like it's
That's U.S. foreign policy in
That's-
general, though.
yeah, but that's like the fucking like American, like average American person is just so fucking cucked by like American ideology that we're like, oh yeah, no, that was totally legit.
Yeah.
That's monstrous. That is horrific.
Yeah, it
and
is monstrous.
I got like that's my yeah. I'm not. Japan did fucked up stuff. I get it. We're talking about something different here.
Yeah.
So, all right. No, so here's the thing. So imagine you're going to work or you're going to school. You live in Hiroshima. You're a Japanese person. Like, it's one of the few cities that hasn't been like bombed to shit. It's 8:15 in the morning, and then you look over. There's a flash up above one of the hospitals. The bomb explodes. 130,000 people were killed by the blast wave and the firestorm. It's 180 million degrees in the explosion, and at that heat, fat melts, bones are charred, eyeballs burst, bodies crumble into toxic dust. 90% of people within 500 meters of the explosion are dead. The ground temperature reaches over 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And those further away, they had their skin burned. People's faces were burned off. Their skin was charred with the patterns of their clothing. Like you could see patterns of their kimonos based on the light and dark patterns. It was burned onto their skin. The survivors were poisoned and their hair fell out. Their eyes were scorched white. Soft tissues in the stomach and the guts fall out. And then even decades later, thousands of survivors had died from various cancers. And radiation poisoning is one of the worst ways to die. It's because it's incredibly agonizing. And 90% of the doctors and nurses in Hiroshima were killed in the initial explosion, which means that most of the people who died, they died in agony.
Medical care of any kind.
Yeah, they died without any care. They died in pain. And then the survivors, their future children suffered birth defects. And so here's the thing.
There's a documentary called White Light, Black Rain, which is extremely good, and it was part of my radicalization story because it really turned America into a monster for me. But in it, they talk about how all the people that died in the bombings, but all of the children that were orphaned as a result of people dying in the bombings. And these orphans, they didn't have anywhere to go because everybody was trying to rebuild the city, their homes, their lives, their whatevers. And so they would basically go to the outskirts of town and they would try to scavenge food, but all the food had radiation. And so they would end up dying of radiation poisoning, or they would give it to their children.
%2 of the fissile material in that bomb was actually detonated. So that was 2% of its full power. The B-83 nuclear bomb, which is the mainstay of the U.S. nuclear arsenal today in 2018, is 80 times more powerful than that at full capacity. And then they did it again in the next week, I think, at Nagasaki. That killed 74,000 people.
3 days later.
Yeah,
the first
sounds
bombing
right.
was the 6th, the second was the 9th on August.
Yeah, there's 74,000 people by the end of the year at Nagasaki. And so we have to retell this story of they dropped the bomb to save lives because it's really frightening to grasp the idea that the government and the military and the powers that be that govern our lives, that are currently in charge of everything, would sacrifice so many innocent lives and not just kill people, but just do some of the most horrific things that have happened to human beings. They would do that for a political bargaining chip. They wouldn't do that to end the war. They weren't doing it to end the war. They were doing it to strong-arm another country that they thought they were going to be fighting.
Strong-arm a fucking country that would never do that to humans. Like think about the heroes and villains that America likes to talk about. You know, like this is a bargaining chip. This is some kind of way to pressure the Soviets, a nation that for decades was fighting to build a society where people and kids and just everybody in general could live their best lives.
But on top of that, why in the first place do they need that bargaining chip over the Soviet Union? What do they have so much to fear from the Soviet Union? And the answer is simply that communism works, and that is against profit interests. So literally, if you trace the motive all the way back, these atrocities were committed literally to protect profits.
Yeah.
Yo, fuck America.
Straight up.
Jesus Christ.
Death to America. Said it before, I'll say it again.
No JK this time.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, and so this has been a thing, like, kind of throughout the century. Like, there were a lot of people at the time who condemned it. They were like, if this is what it takes to win, like, what's going on here? But then in 1995, the Smithsonian, on the, I guess that would have been the 50th anniversary of the bombing, they were going to have an exhibit. They were going to show the bomber that dropped the bomb, the Enola Gay. They were going to show that, but they were also going to have some sign, like some displays and stuff talking about, like, well, there are different interpretations of why we dropped the bomb. Like, they're like kind of talking about the controversy, quote unquote, and the American Legion, which is a like veterans group, and then like the U.S. Air Force Society, or like some other veterans group, like threw such a fit, and they lobbied and they wrote articles, and they were like, all these academics are just so unpatriotic and they hate America, and they made it about like, we need to be proud of everything that happened there. We dropped to save American servicemen's lives and all of this stuff, and they just canceled the exhibit. But like,
Because how do you justify your actions if you understand the...
You can't. That's the thing. That's exactly why we have to stick with this idea of like, oh, well, they dropped the bombs. Because they dropped the bombs to save American lives or whatever. Well, and why are American lives worth more than Japanese lives? Well, it's because we're fucking Americans. And it's racism, it's Orientalism, it's just the fucking... It's nationalism, it's patriotism. Yeah. It's this ridiculous, absurd idea that our
Americans need to simplify everything into being good guy versus bad guy. And they cannot grasp the idea of Americans being the bad guy.
Yeah. The history of America is us always being the good guy. And there are people, an overwhelming majority of people to this day, that think that we're the good guys.
Yeah.
You have your fucking Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes that think that we're the good guys. We've just made some missteps recently.
Yeah, right. Talks about John McCain as a paragon of human decency.
Right, you don't get to talk about the missteps that we've made and the things that we're doing wrong when we did this.
It's a hangover from like the Manifest Destiny.
Oh yeah. Well, it's a hangover from Manifest Destiny, but it's in a base level, it's white supremacy. It's Western white hegemonic supremacy, and this idea that we are the saviors of the world around us. That's the reason why we invaded Vietnam. That's the reason why we've invaded
Korea.
various Middle Eastern countries. Like, all of that comes back to white European humans being billed and seen as the best. It's fucked. It's absolutely fucked. And this is why we can't have fucking nice things when shitty fucking leftists talk about, oh, well, go ahead and vote, it's harm reduction, etc. This, like, who is it helping? What harm reduction is actually happening?
This is a key that we're trying to bring up at the Marxist Center along with Allison. That anti-imperialism is the hands down most important contradiction that we need to address.
As leftists in the imperial core.
In the imperial core, we need to be resisting imperialism above all other things. Universal healthcare, great. Communism, fantastic. Let's get there. But the number one thing we should be focusing on right now is anti-imperialism, because there is nothing more important than ending one, because that undermines the ability of the United States to extract resources from the rest of the world, which
Right.
undermines its power. But it also means that people in other countries aren't dying to satisfy those needs. And so, yeah, I mean, fuck off imperialist leftists. Like,
Well-
fuck off, all of you.
It's not even just that. It's now we get into the conversation of how can we. Well, no, actually, because it gets into different. But like, anti-imperialism also brings out like we're on this stolen land,
Right.
and like
yeah.
literally we see that with like Navajo and like people that we.
Well, that's the thing. They're building this bomb. Like
Yeah.
they're building bombs with like
Navajo
uranium
labor,
mined
yeah.
by Navajo people, like from the blood and the sweat and like sacrificing the genetic like the health of Navajo people. Like we've got hundreds of years of genocide and oppression, and then they're continuing to, and they're using Navajo labor, like like these people who don't have any other options, extracting like their health and their labor to build these bombs to murder
Yeah.
like hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
And in that sense, think about it in the context too, where you have these quote unquote war crimes about using chemical weapons and all these things, and the complete like even the U.S. was absolutely horrified. Even the U.S. government was horrified by the things that Nazi Germany was doing. But then at the same time, essentially forcing Navajo peoples to use their labor in poisonous environments
Right.
is not much different than what they were condemning at the same fucking time.
Because they didn't actually give a shit about what Nazi Germany was doing.
The
other
biggest
than
criminal-
to, like justify joining the war effort. That was it. I mean, they didn't actually care. Like there were many U.S. businesses that supported Nazi
Henry
Germany.
Ford.
Henry Ford,
Right.
IBM,
Yes.
fucking yeah. I mean, just like it's a nonstop shit fest. Like they don't actually care.
The biggest criminal does not get to play world police.
Well, I mean, they do. It's fucking
It's just
bullshit.
bad. Yeah. No, but yeah.
There's no justice.
No, it's yeah, I mean I'm a materialist, so I don't use this word easily. It's evil. It is evil. By any meaningful morality, it is evil. So yeah, but that's the thing that we have to grasp. That's what that's the body count of nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, all these things. I mean, I'm a third through my notes, so we got we got a lot of like there's a lot more. Like this is just the beginning. Like this is literally the beginning. I mean, obviously, I'm glad that this didn't happen again. This hasn't happened again, which is good. But people still talk about it like it was a thing that was acceptable. And when you have that attitude, when you have the attitude that this was anything other than a horrific crime against humanity, then, well, we're not in a good place. So, anyway, so we mentioned the Soviet Union. What are they doing during this time? Trying to bring it back around.
Single-handedly winning the European war.
Pretty much. And they're invading the northern part, invading from the northern part of Japan.
Right, like I think it was like a week before they declared war on Japan, and like a week later the surrender happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so anyway, so in the Soviet Union, in regards to nuclear bombs, so there had been some nuclear fission research during this time, but it slowed once the war started. Since I mean, they had fucking German tanks surrounding their cities. It doesn't make as much sense to be talking about like, oh, we're investigating atoms when you've got panzers coming towards you.
Can't do science when you need to pick up a rifle.
And so there were like 20 physicists working on this project during a lot of the war.
I've heard it was the Russian winter that killed the Nazi army.
It helped, but like also
the
the
Soviets didn't
millions
kill
of
anybody. It was just the winter.
yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna say the winter didn't help, but it was mostly the millions of brave Soviet soldiers
And the
that-
mud season.
Well, yeah, that too. So in 1942, there's this guy named Georgy Flyarov. He sees that British, German, and U.S. scientists suddenly stop publishing anything on nuclear fission. And he's like, So he writes a couple of letters to Stalin and is like, they're building bombs. We got to build a bomb. Yeah. And so Stalin's like, real shit. And he does it. and so they start this project headed by Anatoly Alexandrov and Igor Kurchatov, supervised by Beria. Is that how you say his name?
Friend of the show, Beria.
No, fuck Beria.
I have no idea.
Fuck Beria.
You look at me like I can pronounce
You
Russian
guys
names.
talked about Beria, like...
Yeah, it's Beria or Beria.
okay.
It's one or the other.
Beria.
Chef Kissy Face.
Okay, so he was in charge of it. And so they were researching nuclear weapons and nuclear reactors, as well as how to create like the necessary quantities of uranium-235. And so the Soviet Union didn't really have very much uranium. The only uranium they had was from this really shitty mine in Tajikistan, which sucks. Because the oldest and most well-developed uranium mines besides... Beria. Okay. Beria. Okay. Beria. Okay.
Beria. You gotta do this whole section over every time.
We had to start a whole episode over.
Okay. The best mines, besides the ones in the Congo, were in Czechoslovakia, which were controlled by the Nazis. So, like, not only was the Soviet Union trying to design and build bombs, they also had to design and build a, like, uranium mining industry from scratch, basically. So the USSR had a ton of spies in the UK, but not very many in the US. So most intel on the bomb in the US came from volunteers. And so the trick is, there's not really a secret to making atomic bombs. Like, once you know how to do it, you can pretty much do it. It just takes a lot of resources. And so, so what the spies did was they helped the Soviets build their bombs faster by avoiding a lot of the same dead ends and mistakes that the US figured out. So I'm going to go through a couple of the, the big spies.
Heroes.
The heroes. They are heroes.
They are absolutely heroes.
All right, so the first spy I'm going to talk about, his name is Klaus Fuchs.
And he's my hero.
Yeah, well, he's a legit dude. So he was from a family of German communists. He joined the German Socialist Party, like the good one, the SPD, in 1932. Well, the one that's not the National Socialist Party.
They're the ones who killed Rosa. So.
Well, okay, he left in 1933,
okay.
So it had already happened.
Yeah, too late.
He was like 10 when that happened.
Okay.
He didn't kill Rosa.
Bernie killed Rosa.
Right, that's true.
Fucking Bernie.
So yeah, he fled the Nazis, and so his brother's wife and kid died in Nazi concentration camps. His father was jailed for anti-government agitation. His sister killed herself after her husband was sent to a concentration camp. This guy fucking hated Nazis. He had every reason to hate Nazis. So he ended up working in England on the Tube Alloys project, which was basically the British Manhattan Project, which actually ended up getting absorbed into the Manhattan Project. But in 1942, he got British citizenship, but by that point, he was already passing secrets to the Soviets because he was a committed communist. And
If
yeah.
only we had our hype button.
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I forgot
it's
it
okay.
at home.
So in 1944, he ends up he gets transferred to Los Alamos, and so he was considered one of the best scientists in his division, and he passed on a bunch of detailed drawings and data about the implosion method, how to produce plutonium, and it was Fuchs's information that led to the USSR switching to a plutonium bomb. So his information led to the Soviet Union switching to an implosion design because of all the shit he was sending them. He went through this guy named Harry Gold. So everything we know about from his coworkers, they said he was a quiet but he was a popular guy. He was a good dancer. He was fun to drink with.
He's the opposite of me.
And he was a good dancer. He was fun to drink with. He was a really popular babysitter in Los Alamos. Yeah, because he was like a really trustworthy, like kind dude. He
In
loaned.
my revolution, only the spies can dance.
So there's another physicist who was on the Los Alamos project named Richard Feynman, who's very he's kind of famous. Fuchs loaned his car to Richard Feynman so that Feynman could make it to Albuquerque to be with his wife who's dying of tuberculosis. Like Fuchs was a legit dude. Like this was a good man. He got arrested in 1950 after some Soviet codes got cracked. They busted him and Harry Gold, his courier. He got sentenced to 14 years in prison. He served 9, and then he moved to the German Democratic Republic, where he helped run a nuclear research lab until he died.
Wait.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah. So the next one is, you've probably heard of these people, Julius Rosenberg. He was a civilian engineer at an army lab in New Jersey. His code name with the Soviet intelligence was liberal for some reason. But yeah, and so
A spicy take.
and so his wife's name was Ethel Rosenberg. She wasn't a spy, but her brother's name was David Greenglass, and he was a machinist at Los Alamos. He helped make the explosive lenses for the plutonium bomb. So Greenglass got arrested in 1950 after Fuchs and Rosenberg got busted, and so Greenglass he accused his sister Ethel of being a spy in order to protect his wife, Greenglass's wife, so there were like notes that he said Ethel typed up the notes that they would send over to the Soviets, which was not true. His wife typed up the notes, but he accused his sister so that his wife would get off. So and he went to jail for 10 years. He wrote a letter in 1953 to Eisenhower asking him to commute his sister's sentence, since there's not really any evidence that she actually did anything, but Eisenhower ignored it.
Good guy.
Critical support?
No, and so here's the thing. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg got the electric chair. And so Julius was a spy, but, like, obviously that was good, actually. But, like, Ethel wasn't a spy, and she still got the chair. And, like, the thing is, the Rosenbergs were... I think they were basically sacrifices to assuage the American people's fear of getting bombed by the Soviets. They're like, these people were spies, like, we gotta kill them. Even though, like, there's no fucking evidence Ethel did anything. Right. And then, like, yeah, Julius did. He was a spy, but yeah, again, yeah, that was good. So
history has absolved him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was a
statues to the Rosenbergs.
It was a crime. Yeah. It was a crime what happened to Ethel Rosenberg. So the next one is Theodore Ted Hall. This guy was a prodigy. He graduated from Harvard at 18.
Big fucking deal.
Well, he was the youngest scientist at Los Alamos. No, this guy was legit, because in 1944, he was on leave.
I'm just 25 and recording a podcast.
I'm 27 and I'm trying to think of my accomplishments in life. I have
I'm
a nice
12,
cat.
What is this?
Okay. No, but so in 1944, Ted Hall was on leave for 2 weeks from Los Alamos, and he went to New York City. He walked into the Soviet office, like I think the consulate, and he said, "Listen, I work at Los Alamos. Can I give you guys a report on what we're doing there?" And so,
Nice.
yeah, he was
That's
legit.
fucking awesome.
And he gives them a whole big...
Straight to the point.
Yeah, he gives them a whole big report on Los Alamos, the names of scientists, the shit they're working on, like all this stuff. And so after the war, he worked at the University of Chicago, and he continued passing information to the Soviets about like the hydrogen bomb, which what they were developing. He became a biophysicist. This guy never got convicted.
Nice.
They never caught him. So in 1998, they were doing like a documentary on the Cold War and like Cold War spying, and so he's 73 years old, and he said, "I decided to give atomic secrets to the Russians because it seemed to me it was important that there should be no monopoly which could turn one nation into a menace and turn it loose onto the world as Nazi Germany developed. There seemed to be only one answer to what one should do, and the right thing was to act to break the American monopoly." So he felt like if the United States was the only one who had an atomic bomb, like, they would be assholes. Like, they would be imperialists,
And they were.
which, like, of course they were. So the next spies are Morris and Lona Cohen. And so Morris fought in the Spanish Civil War, and he got wounded, and while he was recovering, he got recruited for Soviet intelligence.
Nice.
And so...
Goals.
Stalin didn't do anything to help the Spanish Republicans.
And so Lona, she was also a committed communist, and so And so basically what they did was they passed info from several Los Alamos scientists to Moscow. Like Lona took a train out to Los Alamos and got couriered information basically. And so in 1950, when all of these other spies were getting busted, they were like, fuck this, and they moved to the Soviet Union.
Noise.
But then in 1954, they moved back to England because...
Not noise.
No, it was noise because they moved to England where
In actual fact, it was noise.
No. So they had an antique book-selling business and an attic full of transmitting equipment. So they had like a long antenna around the perimeter of their attic.
Squad goals.
So they would send this could be us, but you playing. No, like Morris and Lona Cohen, yeah, and so in 1954, yeah, they moved, and they were basically like all the spies in the United Kingdom went to Morris and Lona Cohen, who would transmit their secrets. Like they were the big spy masters. It was awesome. So then in 1961, they got arrested. They both served 8 years in prison, but then they got traded. There was a prison, they got traded for Gerald Brooke, who was some idiot who got arrested in the USSR for smuggling in and passing out anti-Soviet leaflets. Jesus. And so they arrested him. And
Very cool.
It's like a fucking American kid who stole a flyer.
Warm beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so they traded. So the Soviets were like, "Yeah, we'll take those two. We'll give you this idiot if you give them those two." So the Soviet Union traded them for this idiot, and they spent the rest of their lives in the Soviet Union training spies for the KGB.
Fuck yes.
And they both died in the 90s.
Point of fact.
So they were legit. They were legit. And then, so the last spy I'm going to talk about is...
God, we're so fucked. If, anything ever goes down, the trials, we're done for.
That's right. That's why we changed the name of our
2 years from now,
supporters.
oh, yeah, they're fine, but we're fucked.
See, I'm safe. I'm going by a pseudonym.
ADOP. Yeah, nobody's going to figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that, 2 years from now when Trump gets reelected, they're going to be like, all right, well, this is the last, 4 years that this guy's got, so we got to, pass all this shit. It's just, the new anti-communist American Act or whatever, and it's just like, oh yeah, so this podcast, located here in this area, we need all of them.
Done. We will have done our duty by that point, though.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have
get
revolution
traded
by
out.
then.
Yeah.
Maybe
The
we'll get
Proles of
traded
the
out by
Round Table
China.
will have been the vanguard. So
Martyrs of the Round Table.
yikes. So the last spy I'm going to talk about is Melita Norwood. And so she was the personal assistant to the director of the British Non-Ferrous Metals Research Association, which was part of the British tube alloys thing. She was the personal assistant from 1932 to 1972. So that's 40 fucking years. She was the secretary, and so and she was a spy. So all the stuff that the director went to the director's desk, she got to see, and so she took copies of everything that was legit and sent it to the Soviet Union for 40 fucking years. And so she was only unmasked as a spy in 1999 when she was 85 years old. And she never went to jail.
You got me, Skippy.
Well, and it's and the thing it's wild because when her neighbor, when it was publicized that she had been a Soviet spy, her neighbors were like, "What the fuck?" Because there was one guy who was saying she just he said. He's British, so she potters around in her garden and she grows apples and she makes jam. She's a little old lady. What are you talking about?
It's pretty incredible how fucking bad the West has been at unearthing spies and shit. We joke about how shitty liberals are all no, Russia's influencing our elections, but it's damn, Holmes, you have no fucking idea, do you?
Remember when Russia was actually influencing our...
The good old days.
Yeah.
No, but so what Melita Norwood actually said about what she was doing, she said, "I did what I did not to make money, but to help prevent the defeat of a new system which had at great cost given ordinary people food and fares which they could afford, a good education, and a health service."
The people's hero. When we win this revolution, all these people are getting their own statues.
Yeah, every single one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So so Melita Norwood died in 2005. Never got convicted. Never went to jail. Like she was a fucking badass. Like she was awesome. So these were the spies that helped the Soviets develop their own atomic program. So in May 1945, after the fall of Berlin, this guy named Yuli Karatan, he was sent to Berlin to see what the Nazis had been working on. He came back with 100 tons of uranium to help the project, and so he ended up being like the director of something called Arzamas 16, which is a nuclear research facility. Some of them called it Los Arzamas, which was funny. He had this position for 46 years. Like,
Damn.
But so in July of 1945 at Potsdam, we talked about this a little bit. So at the Potsdam conference, Truman mentioned to Stalin that like, oh, we have a new bomb that we're trying out, and Stalin was like, cool, hope you can use it on the Japanese, and like wasn't shook. Is what basically what Truman
Doesn't
noted.
afraid of anything.
But then when he got back, Stalin was like, okay, they got a bomb, we gotta get a fucking bomb. Since he already knew what kind of bomb it was because of Klaus Fuchs specifically. So they build this nuclear facility called Mayak, which is I don't remember where I don't remember where it is, and I didn't write it down. So but they build this nuclear facility to like produce plutonium, and they start rushing to kind of build their own. When you're rushing for a nuclear bomb, there's no time for Stalin.
No.
Sorry.
Cursed.
Dumb.
That was silly.
It was dumb. Okay. Yeah, and so they had this nuclear facility named Mayak. At Mayak, they dumped waste. They dumped all their nuclear waste into the river, which flowed right out to the Arctic Ocean. So that wasn't great. And then they dumped a couple of waste into a couple lakes that they used for cooling the nuclear shit. And so there's one called Lake Karachay, which they say might be the most polluted spot on Earth. So not great. Not great. But
I've seen the three-eyed fish.
at the very least, yeah.
Fish are woke as fuck.
Third, the fish's pineal glands are fully decalcified.
Just a fish in the lotus.
Floating above the lake. So December of 1946, the Soviets get their first chain reaction. And they had some trouble with producing plutonium because after they defeated the Nazis, they got the Czechoslovakian mines, but those are mostly depleted, so they're trying to find out how to get like more uranium and plutonium and shit. But so in 1948, they get their first successful nuclear reactor. 1949, they get their first nuclear bomb, which was RDS-1, or they called it First Lightning. The Americans codenamed it Joe 1, after our boy.
Joe 1!
What?
Yeah, no, so a lot of the production and construction was from work camps, the quote-unquote gulags, so which I think at this point was a lot of, like, Nazis and shit, so...
Why were we restricting
That's
their
why
freedom?
they're so upset about gulags.
Yeah,
Nazis had to work.
Yeah, and so one scientist on the Manhattan Project, Hans Bethe, he estimated that all the spies helped the USSR get the bomb a year earlier than they would have otherwise. It's really hard to say. Who knows?